everyone. Well, actually, it's so dark, I don't see anybody. Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you. And yeah, it's a TV here because mainly the problem is I forgot to announce that I need one system here and here, and then the line can't go so easily. So it's with the TV, and the words will be very small. So if there's something I should repeat the text, the quotes, and I will just do it again. So the title of this project, or this performance, I name it as In the Heat of the Moment. It's mainly because it came up with the idea, a lot of these works are related to improvisation, and I want to draw attention to, like, we are now here, the performance itself only happens now, and it was with the moments of when I was in Africa, and the moment of improvisation that sometimes it just happened that you hear it now, which it will not happen again anymore. And but later on, I changed the title into Music Beyond Traditions because I want to address to the fact that it's very much intercultural, absolutely. And so I think it would be nicer to draw attention to that part, but I'll leave it for later because now I have this piece from Michiel, which I think Michiel is here, and I see you, and thank you so much. And it's more with a funky style that that Michiel combined his experience in Africa with African music to mine. So it's a mixture, and it's a completely fully written piece, Afro-funk. It's a lot of energy, and so in this sense, this piece I consider as a complete process, but there are still other pieces under development, which I will show you later. So then I changed the title, that's what I want to say, because then I changed the title to Music Beyond Traditions, because I see it as a second stage of my artistic output. So, okay, come back to this. Okay. So first, I will start a bit the background, which is the history of the marimba. And this instrument, I think most of you here will know it. It's an instrument that has an ethnic origin from Africa, from Mexico, from Indonesia, but it is not that clear. And the first model of this instrument is made in 1918 by a company called Diagen in America. And the first time it's showcased in a concert with 100 other marimbas, like a marimba orchestra, to play some music work like bolero or well, I don't have it here. And then it's conducted by Musa. Musa is an important percussionist and a composer. And so it was in 1933. And so afterwards, in 1940, the instrument gained attention as a solo instrument played by, composed by Paul Creston, played by Vida Shanovich. And so the instrument started to be known as a solo instrument. Otherwise, everybody would think it's just a continuation of the xylophone. So even we know who made it, but the company did not really said what actually the idea come from. So did they take the idea from African balafon, which I'm going to show you, or is it from the Mexican Guatemala tradition? So it wasn't really clear. And so also if I look into the repertoire, it's not absolutely telling me this instrument is linked to any of these ethnic origins. So I find it interesting if I could build a connection between the two, between the tradition and this modern instrument, perhaps then I could enrich the repertoire and the playing technique. Well, this instrument is built since just 100 years ago, so there's still a lot of room to do more with it. So for instance, later on, one important work is drumming by Steve Reich, which is that Ghanaian drumming patterns is in it. So it's still not exactly from the idea of balafon or from Guatemala marimba. And the next thing I have to say is about oral tradition. Why? Because I did my research. I started with a field study and also reading in literature or, by ethnomusicologists. And but when I come to the moment to learn it, then I found out oral tradition has a big part that influenced this very special music culture, I would say, in the beginning. And because the way of learning the instrument by imitation without paper score, that changed a lot the way how we perceive music in the process of learning it. So I always draw attention to this part because this is how I started, and I see like oral tradition has such a big influence change to my music practice. So even I have paper score, I will also try to think how can I get beyond it. To show how oral tradition is done in Africa, I always show this video, but I think it should work. Yeah. Is my teacher, Yusuf Keita, the adult person, and then this is his son. So he's showing him how to play on the instrument. So music learning under oral tradition is by imitating the sound, and I found out movement has a big role in it, because the child is just following where the stick moves and he repeats it at the same time. But for me, as a person that grown under the Western music education, or perhaps the Chinese also, and that makes me understand that another culture is not just the notes that they play is different, but also the music practice they do. And so when I was there in Africa to learn with the balafon teachers, it was actually very difficult, even something that's very simple. How they explain it, that's first of all, rhythm is not a word they will commonly use. It's about showing. Everything is just the music about doing. For if there's a wrong note, what they would say is you have to move your mallet to the next sledge, and then they immediately come to your instrument to show you. They would just say, oh, play like this, play like that. It was all very vague and unclear. And when it comes to a technique, more difficult technique, which you need more explanation, then it goes very complicated.
So just to interrupt, we will work, or he wants to teach us to play the melody in the right hand, and not to play with the octave, but with a comping left hand. Okay. Like we know from the standard that you remember it's exactly the same. Yeah. So
this way of education changed the perception, like I mentioned. If it is from a score to the movement pattern to sound, or imitation of sound and movement to how I play to the sound, this is actually two slightly different pathways. Then the way of adapting to it is not just to say click, you do it. It needs a bit experience, so how to get out of your past to do something kind of new. And that's not so easy for everyone. I have people come together with me to Africa, and they have all different ways, but still paper score is something they rely on. And this is one system that Paul Nash from Holland is now teaching balafon. He used this square system, so the symbols on top is the notes on the balafon, and then when there is a space, meaning there's a rest. So it reads actually vertically like this, that the music goes from the top to bottom, instead of left to right like we do. Still, this perception process for me is not the same, because it's still referring to the symbolic representation. I find it more interesting is just to follow, to imitate what they do. So here is a text that I think might be very small. So I'm going to read it. Okay. Then this experience made me think about body movement. I'm not only following the sound, but I observe movement. Well, I'm not here to say in the Western world we don't imitate, we don't follow. In jazz, it's a big part of the education as well. And I also learned from a teacher how to move my arms to make the sound. But the degree is different. That's quite obvious. And so in Gestural Affordances of Musical Sound, a volume written by Rolf Inge Godoy discussed the splitting of music into a score part and a performance part due to the use of notation. Western musical culture has been able to create highly complex organizations of musical sound with large-scale forms and large ensembles, thanks to the development of notation. We could claim that Western musical thinking often tends to ignore the fact that any sonic event is actually included in a song sound producing gesture, a gesture that starts before and often ends after the sonic event of any single note or group of tones. In other words, Western musical thought has not been well equipped for thinking the gestural contextual inclusion of tone events in music. So then the next step in my project, I stress the movement in balafon music or African music. Of course, I can't include all the genres in Africa continent as African music, that they're all the same. But actually here, I mean the balafon music in West Africa, in Burkina Faso and Mali, which I've experienced. So writings from ethnomusicologists on movement. There are two quotes I should address here, which I found very interesting. First one is from Erich von Humboldt. This implies an essential contrast between our rhythmic conception and the Africans. We proceed from hearing, they from motion. We separate the two phrases by bar line and commence the metrical unit, the bar, with the acoustically stressed time units. To them, the beginning of the movement, the arms, the arses, is at the same time the beginning of the rhythmical figure. Upbeats are unknown to them. So it's a very controversial remark. Yeah. Especially this phrase, we proceed from hearing, they from motion, is again a kind of a racial discrimination, perhaps. But what's interesting in here, it made me think about how movement is so important in playing that actually we forgot it. We should maybe put the emphasis in it. I look at it at 2 points. So the primordial experience of listener and performer, and the artistic idiosyncrasy in music practice. So primordial experience, which I mean like human experience of listening and playing music. Would it be different between the African and the Western? Like you have the ears, it goes in, and then through your brain, the inner space, and then it go out. You do something. I will not say this is different, but perhaps that's what not Humboldt mean here. So if we look into the artistic idiosyncrasy in the music practice, then there's a really different world of it, because in Africa, music is because of the function of the society that needs it. For example, music is made for preaching a moral concept, or is to accompany working in the fields. So music is made for function, and on the other hand, these functions influence how the music is formed. So these ideas for like onion making for women working in the fields, how they throw the equipment in the air and the drumming comes together with it, it actually forms how the music it is. So it's not purely in like the conceptual sense, but it's all connected, like holistically. The working, the life of the people are all connected. And then the second quote from Blacking, John Blacking. For me, it was essential to understand the close relationship between the body, the structure, movement, and feeling of the body and the production of musical sound. I learned the relationship from my analysis of African music. In the Sangha Kabliba, music body movements play a major role in the construction of melodic patterns. Kalimba is an instrument like this, that you play with 2 thumbs. So there's a kind of middle line, and then it goes outside, inside. And so first of all, this instrument already defines how you play the music, how the music has to be composed. So it will be in 2 lines, intertwined. And that would be a little bit similar to how balafon is composed. Balafon music is composed also with the left and the right hand. Rarely that it is 2 hands work together alternately to form a melody, which in a Western culture, we always practice even the evenness to have 2 hands to play one melody. And so what Blacking did is that he analyzed this kalimba, and then he tried to analyze, are there any musical patterns that are coherent among all these compositions? But he did not find really interesting conclusion. But when he figured out the fingering of playing the instrument of the pieces, then he found out there are some kind of conclusion he could draw upon. There are some recurring patterns of the fingering appears, combined with different patterns of polyrhythm. If I have to go deeper in this discussion of how movement influence African music and how movement has this role in Western music, that's the last quote I would like to set is from Angelica Nusso, who made an analysis of Kant's view on human experience. Within Kant's transcendental investigation, on the contrary, the body is never a physical given. It is itself the condition for something to appear to us as a fact and to be experienced as a fact. Once again, the body is not a more or less contingent object of experience, but a necessary a priori condition thereof. So in Western music, we will have to ask the question, why have so many theorists failed to acknowledge that musical movement is, among other things, human movement? So musical movement means like the tonal motion, for instance, that is moving from do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, or which is like rhythm that is from unstable to stable. So this kind of changes from stability to instability in notes, in rhythm, then is in the West musical movement, but not exactly the movement that we play on the instrument. And I think that has to do a lot with the Cartesian view, that the ideals of creation, conception, and abstraction of the Western classical music are pertinent to the Cartesian ideal, that it embraces this logic of metaphysical asymmetry between the mind and the body, which the mind, representing the mental events of conceptual ideas and thinking of the musical sound, is seen as symmetrical to even the superior and intrinsic over the body. then in my project, the next step is now what I'm doing is to analyze how movement patterns on playing the balafon could bring some idea of actually how music is constructed. I think I missed that, but so I draw lines to have graphs of the music instead of using the 5 lines stuff, because of this system we have the pentatonic scale, but pentatonic scale is not consecutive and it's like whole tone, half step, and then whole tone, and it is not actually equal. But in fact, I observed that for the balafon, it is actually an equal step. They don't have exactly the idea of interval as in Western music. For instance, as an observation, the same movement patterns could just move one note up or one note down because they work with singer, and sometimes singer could not sing exactly the way that the balafon is tuned. So they will require the players to move the whole pattern down or up. And in this sense, the whole melodic material changed because the intervals is not again the same pentatonic, because it's not like from the C major to the D major, but it becomes like from this wooden plate to the next wooden plate. And which is actually, this one observation, they don't see music as we do. That's something I still have to investigate, to maybe just to ask them to discuss it with more concrete question. So then they will know what I'm asking. But when I first asked them, it was for them just, it's all the same, why not? It's the same song. But for us, it's only the rhythm similar, but the melodic materials are all twisted. So from this part of the research, I worked with Enric Riu, a composer from Spain. He wrote this piece called Sound Portrait 5. And we work on the idea of how we communicate movement patterns. And is it something workable for us? And for him, this is partly his project to discuss how composer and performer can balance the roles. So he gave me movement patterns which allow me the freedom to improvise.